What's going on, guys? Another episode of Euro Garage. Today I'm looking at bodywork. I've got a lot of bodywork to do as this car is pretty rough. I've got to pretty much sand all the dings down, maybe fill some. I got some holes to fill, and then primer it. After we're done with that, we can start getting it prepped for wrapping. Now, I'm doing a wrap because I'm on a budget and I don't really want to spend $3 grand on a paint job to have it immaculate when all I really want to do is have this car go fast. So pretty much what I've done so far on the hood is taken all the crap off after we stripped the vinyl off and then left all that adhesive. And I've taken sanding down, I've done a medium grit and then fine grit, and I've taken it all the way down to metal at some points just to get it smooth. After that, I've gone back with some primer, a filler primer, and then a self-etching primer after that, just to get it so it's very smooth and it'll take the wrap very well and I won't have any imperfections. Now, this is not ideal, and it's not recommended that you wrap over primer, but seeing as this car, you know, I'm just doing it for fun, I think it'll turn out okay. First step is we're going to remove all this trim, these impact strips off the sides. Now, sometimes you're going to want to reuse these, so you save them and you got to be careful pulling them off, but I'm not going to use them. I'm just going to wrap over it and leave the gaps there. We might have to fill the holes, but we'll come to that when we get there. So essentially these just clip on, and with a good pull, I think you'll see it'll come right off. Gentle prime. Now I probably broke the clips, but like I said, I don't really care. Ow!
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G.
Snoop Dogg!
Now I'm taking some denatured alcohol just with a plain old rag and getting all the junk out of the grooves from it. It developed over the years, you know? And as soon as I'm done with this, I can take some sandpaper and clean up all this, then prime over it, sand it again, and get it ready for wrapping. So I'm about to sand all this, get it clean, and then prime it. I recommend with any sanding job, especially on a car, that you get one of these sanding sponges, because when you're going over a flat piece, you don't want your fingers to create little divots in the paint that have low spots and high spots. With a flat piece of sanding sponge, you just go over it and it'll help keep everything nice and even. Yeah, in the end, it all comes down to doing it for cheap, because there's no reason for me to spend weeks getting this car looking perfect if I'm just gonna run it around town, have it turbo, and probably blow something up, you know? It's just a fun project for me, and it really shows because I'm doing all this in my school parking lot. So I've got some paint drips here, which is actually, I didn't do this, but it's a perfect example of how to take care of paint drips. You can see them right here. It's from that eggshell color that they repainted it, but it's stripped down. So basically all I'll do is I'll take my flat side of my sanding sponge with the 150 medium grit on it, and I'll just take it off, sort of in line with the rest of my sanding and the door. I'll just gently go over it until they're no longer visible and I can't feel them anymore. Now I've had to take off a lot. You can see sort of the primer and the layers of paint on this thing. It's got, let's see, bare metal, primer, primer, black, primer, primer, white. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of paint on this car. And that's why it's such a mess, and that's why I have to do this. But as you can see, there's no longer any runs. It's perfectly smooth on my hands. And now I'll move to up here where this masking line is, and then some of these scratches that I have in here. So this is pretty much what it'll look like after you're done sanding. It'll be very smooth. You can run your hand across it and not feel any raised bumps or edges. And this is where if you were painting, you would go and you would prime and you would fill these holes, or you would prime it, paint it, and then reinstall all of the removed impact strips from earlier. But now I'll go ahead and I'll lightly brush on just some primer on these exposed metal parts and things like that, just to make sure that they don't rust and get them ready for wrapping. Now the professional opinion is that you hold the can 6 to 8 inches away from it, you lightly spray, and you add 1 coat at a time. I try to do that, as you will get the best results doing that. But with a primer, you don't have to be as careful, because when you go back, you can very easily sand this down. But when you're putting on a base coat or something like that, you have to be very careful. You have to do light coats and build them up slowly, or else you will develop runs, and then you have to restart essentially. So here's what it's looking like after priming it all, getting it all done. Some of the issues I were having completely disappeared. I'll go back and I'll sand after this, but for now that's good. Now after about 10 minutes, I think this primer is nice and set. And I'm gonna go over it with some fine 3M P320 sandpaper. Just a little more primer. Go over any spots I brought back to bare metal. Go over the spots that I was having some trouble with. And then I'll just do it all again. And as I do it, it'll fill in any little imperfections. Do the same thing on the rear quarter panel. You really want to take your time with this process, because if you go with too hard of a sandpaper, or you go too aggressively, or you don't let it dry, you end up having to do the whole thing over again, and it takes you twice as long. So it's worth taking the time to let it dry and doing it properly. I'll tell you that right now. That'll save you the most time. I've had projects where I go to sand it too early, the primer isn't dry and set, and then I end up scratching it up and I have to take off all the paint and start over again. You can see here I have the doors and the hood done. I just have to go back and do the other side. So after maybe about an hour, I've got pretty much both sides done. I have to body fill these holes in this fender and sand this back a little more, but it's coming together. So now I'm gonna work on the trunk. Basically, they used to have a spoiler on this trunk, and there's 4 holes, 2 on each side, drilled into it all the way through, and they've got a little bit of rust in there. So here I can show you sort of what to do when you have a light surface rust, how to fix it, and and how to fill in some holes. I'm going to be using just regular sandpaper, maybe a file, and some body filler for these holes. Anything over a penny or like those on the sides, you should get it welded, but this, it'll be okay just filling it. You'll never notice. Otherwise, if you have too large of a hole and you fill it with body filler, it can cake out and then you end up once again doing everything all over again. So all I'm doing right now is I'm just taking a rolled up piece of sandpaper and I'm getting it in these holes and I'm trying to get out all the surface rust that's built up in there that I can. Now, you're probably not going to get it perfectly bare metal. If you can, that's better, but anything is better than nothing. So now I'm back with a fresh sheet of sandpaper, the medium grit, and I'm just going to go over this trunk. I'm going to try to get out all these, starting with the holes, the uneven bits, the parts that are going to make my wrap look like shit. So now that I've sanded all this, I'm ready to prime it, and I'll just go over lightly, like same as the doors. Any overspray I'll just wipe off, honestly. So I've done a lot of the body work. I still have to fill some bits, but I've got everything primed off so it won't rust while I'm not working on it. But now I've gotten to the point where it's getting a little late in the day. I've got other things to do, so I'm gonna go ahead and take off this bumper, and then I'm gonna bring it inside and I'm gonna wrap it in the inside where it's nice and warm. There we go. Boy, that looks good without bumpers. So after several hours working on the E30, I've got a lot of the body work done. I need to come out probably tomorrow and do the filling, especially on this fender and those holes in the back. But I have both bumpers removed. I have all exposed metal primed. I have most of the imperfections sort of ironed out. It's looking pretty good. And I've even gone a step further to rust proofing this car by using a rubberized undercoating on the inner fender well. Just for some added insurance. What's going on, you guys? Got some body filler here, and we're gonna body fill these holes in this fender. Should go pretty quick, and I'm just hoping to knock this out today. So now I'm mixing the filler and the hardener. Once it's sort of this pink color, it's ready to be applied. Now I'm just gonna put a little bit on this hole, sort of let it get in there, and then I'm going to take, ideally you would use one of those plastic former things, but I'm just going to use this. And my hand a bit. Now you want to have a little more than you need on there so that when you sand it, you'll end up with a perfectly smooth surface. Now I've done one side, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the other side. So first I just take a small goop of it, tap it in, and then I'll flatten it out, making sure it fills in that hole. So I'll let that sit 20 or 30 minutes, and then I come back, I sand, and I prime it. So lastly, I've got this large crack right here that I need to fill. So I'm gonna let this sit for half an hour, and then I'll come back, I'll do a little bit more putty, or I'll sand, I'll do a little bit more putty, and then I'll sand again, and I'll prime it, and I'll be finished. Now, I'm doing it this way, and I'm doing it very quickly, just so I can get it done. Eventually, it's likely that I'll cut these whole fenders out and put in some rivet fenders, because I don't like the way this is done, and I want to do it properly. So now the putty is set, and I'm sanding it essentially. I'm just taking it back down to a nice flat space so that when I'm done, ideally you won't even see anything. It'll be primed and you won't be able to tell the difference, or that there was ever holes there in the first place. So that's good enough for me. You can see just how it's probably going to end up looking when you're ready to prime it. With a fresh sheet of sandpaper, I'm just going to go over this side now and do the same thing as the other side. So this side was a lot easier because I used a fresh sheet of higher sandpaper and less body filler than the other side, but that's looking good too. So after sanding and filling some more, I got the rear fender to look like this, and I'm going to prime it real quick. So after a lot of sanding, filling, and priming, I finally got this fender and these holes on the back to a point that I'm happy with. It'll never be perfect, but I don't think it'll really be noticeable. So thanks for watching another episode of Euro Garage, guys. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this channel. Send it to a few of your buddies that maybe aren't even into cars. Maybe we can introduce them, you know? So I got some feedback after the first episode, and what I've decided to do is sort of generally go over what I do each episode and develop probably 10-minute episodes that sort of, one's over bodywork, one's over wrap, that sort of thing, and develop the build that way, but also create shorter, in-depth how-to videos, such as whenever I'm removing this trim, I might do a video on how to remove these clips, or how to get a body panel perfectly smooth, or how to install control arms on an E30 that are separate videos entirely, just so they're more easily found when you're just looking for a how-to versus watching a 10-minute video.